forward. Got it. Okay, well, this is Charlie Winterbauer here speaking to you all, and I'm co-chair of the Southeast Coastal chapter of the North Carolina Native Plant Society, and we are privileged to have Amanda Chapman give a talk on the, as you see, if you got to look at your screen, the inventory of the vascular flora of Carolina Beach State Park. And I'm hoping we can work out to where Amanda can, when she gets down this way later on sometime this year, she can give a walk down there. So we'll be looking forward to that. So without any further ado, Amanda, it is yours, and thank you very much.
Are you mute?
Hi, everyone. As Charlie said, I'm Amanda. Oh, I think everybody will have to probably mute themselves, otherwise they'll pop up on the screen.
Yeah.
I'm a recent graduate of UNC Wilmington, and thanks for coming this week. Sorry, I was kind of sick last week, and now I have my voice back. So here's my presentation. I completed an inventory of the vascular flora of Carolina Beach State Park for part of my master's thesis. Charlie was in attendance, so thanks to all of y'all that came when I actually defended at the end of March. And we thought that the club would benefit and enjoy my talk on my research on the park. It's been many, many years in coming. And of course, most of you are very familiar with the park. And this is a modified version of my defense. So there's all sorts of stuff in here. Hopefully it won't be too crazy scientific, but hopefully this will further increase your appreciation of this special place at Carolina Beach. A little about me. I grew up about 10 miles as the crow flies from the cradle of forestry, Mount Pisgah on the Blue Ridge Parkway outside of Asheville. And loved plants and hiking for years. And I have, as an undergraduate at UNCW, I was working in the herbarium and I came across many pressed plants of Dr. Siren, as we were just talking about. And that one of his floras was the lime sinks of Carolina Beach State Park. And that served as the inspiration, the stepping stone to this project. And all of the pictures from here on out were taken by me in the park at various times, unless otherwise noted. And feel free at the end, I'll leave time for questions, and that way you can ask me about any of the pictures or anything else that I cover. Today, I'll define what a flora is. I'll cover some of the previous studies, my objectives for this research, and my hypothesis. I'll go over the field site, natural and anthropogenic disturbances, and also some of the site history. Some of it's fairly interesting. It has a long history. I'll also outline my methods and present my results and interpret my findings. And like I said, leaving time for questions at the end. And as we know, humans have always been interested in identifying and the distribution of plants. Knowing which plants were edible was definitely crucial for survival. In addition of food, humans have always used plants or have used plants for medicine, building materials, ritual purposes, livestock, and food for game, or food for livestock and game. And recently, our understanding of the identity and distribution of plants has advanced our understanding of evolution, historical biogeography, ecology, and of course, taxonomy. As botanists collect plant specimens, they dry them, press them, and then store them in plant libraries. And this image at the top left here is our national herbarium at the Smithsonian. You can see all of those cabinets full, and there's plenty more hallways of that. And let's see here. Understanding our species ranges and the population sizes of these species is especially relevant today with climate change. Here in North Carolina, the average temperatures have already risen over the past century, and this last 17 years have consecutively had the hottest summers on average as a record for the state. Climate change is expected to bring more increased flooding, extreme droughts, along with destructive flooding. There's also documentation that climate change is already altering the present distribution of species and will likely produce novel plant communities in the future. Some ecosystems have already been impacted, and many more may be further negatively impacted as non-native exotic species continue to invade and outcompete native plants that are not adapting as quickly to our new climate. Here you can see Pragmites, and you've seen this all around the battleship, and it's down at Carolina Beach State Park. In 1737, the Model Flora was published by then college student Carl Linnaeus. His flora of Lapland, which is northern Finland, included 100 new species. A flora is defined as a floristic inventory or a checklist of a defined area. So it's a list of plants in a particular area. Within North America, there have been over 3,000 published floras. It's pretty great. Assembled together, all of this published data from these small-scale floras can be put together and utilized to answer broad-scale like ecosystem questions or global questions. Over the centuries, the standards for floras have developed, and I've followed those outlined by Palmer et al. And so we've got a title, a map, political name, ownership, all of the information that you would need to go back to this area and understand what's going on, and also relocate the plants. So the taxonomic scope, the herbaria housing the vouchers, the extent of the time, previous checklist, exotic species, hydrologic data, elevational extremes. They also suggested additional information to increase the usefulness of a flora, like historical disturbances, general assessment of the collection effort, comparison of other published works, subspecies information on the summary tables, any new state or county distribution records. So that would be any plant that hadn't been found in that particular location before. If it's collected, and then it's actually, you can look in the records and see whether or not it is a new distribution record. It just helps track the movement of plants. Small scale map, of course, climate data, rarity status, the National Vegetation Classification Plant Community Codes, and I included all of the suggested additional information and the standard ones. So we ended up with, I think, 230 something pages in my thesis, and then with the flora at the end, I end up with 800 pages. Let's see here. So floristic inventories establish a baseline of the biodiversity within a given area, and therefore can be utilized widely. They can be used for conservation, restoration efforts, more effective resource management. The data can be used for environmental legislation, and of course, scientific research. The inventories can also help increase the public's awareness of the area's environmental, cultural, and intrinsic values. And I've got a common plant guide that I'm producing that should also help. I've got, I think, 5 different or maybe 6 different ones that'll be available at the park in the future that tourists can pick up and use as they're going about their hikes. As you know, Carolina Beach State Park lies along the coastal plain. That's the coastal plain physiographic province on the east coast of North America, and it's part of the Eastern Temperate Forest ecoregion. Within North Carolina, New Hanover County lies at the southeastern edge of the state along the Cape Fear River and the Atlantic Ocean. This proximity to the ocean has shaped the geology and the climate of the region, and in turn has greatly influenced the area's biodiversity. Carolina Beach State Park is also part of the Atlantic and Gulf Coastal Plain Floristic Province. There, I got that out. Within North Carolina, sorry. Let's see. This province has a 30% endemism rate. This means that these plants have evolved in this locale and only naturally occur here and nowhere else in the world. So 30% along the Atlantic Gulf Coastal Plain Floristic Province. This floristic province is also one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots. And a biodiversity hotspot are designated regions with exceptionally high levels of endemism that are also at risk for destruction. And as most everybody's seen in the Southeast, there's continuous building of new areas, plowing down and building. So the park's forests are an example of the once abundant but now endangered longleaf pine ecosystem that used to go along the Southeast all the way to Texas. The Carolina Beach Park Natural Heritage Area was selected for conservation and is rated exceptional by the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program due to the presence of rare plants, animals, and natural community types over limestone. A countywide survey, I think it was in 2003, found that the park contains more rare plants and animals than any other natural area in the county. Very special place. Early floras of the Wilmington area were primarily just lists of species and lacked a lot of detailed information, but they were still exceptionally useful. This was a new place that people were describing the plants there. These include the 1834 Wilmington area flora by Curtis and the 1885 flora by Wood and McCarthy. Curtis reported over 1,000 species within the area. So there was like Pender, New Hanover, and I think Brunswick County. So it's the greater Wilmington area at that time. Over 1,000 species was actually almost a quarter of all known plant species known to occur within the United States at that time. So he was probably one of the first, if not the first, to actually recognize the area as a biodiversity hotspot. Later, the famous French botanist André Michaud came through when he was writing his multi-volume North American Silva, so the Forest of North America, and he detailed the abundance and the uses of our oaks, pines, and the bald cypress, along with their respective natural community types. In the early 1990s, UNCW botany professor Dr. David Zirin and graduate student Karen Warr surveyed the 7 largest lime sinks within Carolina Beach State Park. They spent 26 days in field surveying these pools and ponds. They identified 107 species and produced 260 vouchers that are stored in the UNCW herbarium. They also discovered 1 new state distribution record. So this is a grass that had never been found in North Carolina prior, and 11 new plants for New Hanover County. The other previous surveys that I incorporated into my greater list were from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So all the way back to Taggart and Radford in 1981 and Dumond in 1980 to the Continuous Natural Resources Inventory database of the state park system. If y'all don't know about that, anybody can go to the public INRID, as we call it, and you can click on any taxonomic group that you'd like to make a list of, whether it's butterflies or plants of any of the state parks in the North Carolina system. It's very nice to have a checklist if you're visiting somewhere. All of these surveys previously that I just mentioned were short-term, like a day to a week, maybe a month-long assessment. And each survey added more species to the park's checklist, and often rare species too. But the park lacked a comprehensive multi-season botanical checklist. So therefore my objectives were to survey the entire park for 2 growing seasons, collect representative specimens for herbarium vouchers, and produce a comprehensive vascular plant checklist. So that included all of the previous checklists and all of my findings together. Also, we hypothesized an increase in the number of exotic and invasive plant species over previous surveys, since the warming climate is conducive to the naturalization of heat-tolerant exotics. We also wanted to identify any unknown species or nearby climate tracking species and county distribution records locate rare and invasive plant species. Maybe we did find a few new populations of rare plants, or I found some new populations of rare plants in the park. So it's very useful for the managers of the park, and also, of course, producing information for the public education materials, like the field guides. So I hope that this inventory is used for the management and conservation of our natural heritage as a guide to the park's vascular flora, provide data for research and applied science communities, and also as a record of the ecosystem and plants during the early 21st century. And this is one of our rare sedges, Rhicospora, and it grows right next to the lily pond. And this was one of the new rare species that we did not know previously had occurred in the park. So Carolina Beach State Park is part of the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation. It's 761 acres, and it's in the northwest corner of Pleasure Island. It's bordered to the north by Snow's Cut of the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway and that Cape Fear estuary, so it's tidally influenced portion of the Cape Fear River. And then, of course, we have private and governmental and local government properties also there. A portion of the park in the south is leased to the U.S. Army Military Ocean Terminal at Sunny Point. And then the section along Snow's Cut is leased from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So there's many hands in this pot. But the superintendent manages it all. At various times in the geologic past, the southeastern coastal plain has been submerged by the Atlantic Ocean as the climate has cycled through warming and cooling periods. During those marine transgressions, Carolina Beach State Park over here on the red circle has been submerged, an outer bank, it's been connected to the mainland, and as a result, the park contains sedimentary rocks and surficial deposits laid down during tertiary and quaternary periods when it was submerged. The park also lies on an uplifted geologic area known as the Cape Fear Arch. You can see on this map that the darker areas denote past and present barrier islands. Let's see. Oh, was somebody confused about barrier islands? Let's see here. These islands would have served as refugia for plants and animals. As the climate shifted and flooding the area, the plants and animals would have been relegated to these smaller areas on little islands. And these are probably the main, I consider this the main contributing factor to the high level of endemism. So we've got our geology, our climate, our refugia, and creating this high level of endemism in the area. In New Hanover County, the underlying limestone of the Noose Formation is only visible at Fort Fisher and also along Snow's Cut. The coquina limestone was exposed here at Snow's Cut when the Intercoastal Waterway was built in 1930. Here you can see the exposed limestone underneath this erigeron. And here you've got shell hash, marl, and remnants of the Holocene dune sands, and also the construction spoil from the building of Snow's Cut kind of dumped in this area. The soils in the park are formed through a combination of geology, climate, and biodiversity within the area. Some plants are adapted to grow on dry sand, whereas others are specialized to grow in wetlands. Within the park, the majority of the soils are Curib or lakeland sand series, or Doravan muck, which is an acidic muck found in the swamp and the other wetlands. The topography ranges from around 15 meters, which is 55 feet, down to sea level. This may not seem like much, but these minor differences drastically alter and affect the local hydrology, producing xeric, very dry sands to permanently inundated swamps, wet savannas, and near permanent ponds. Here you can see some of the wet areas I've circled them in blue. In some of these places, the underlying limestone is thought to have dissolved, producing large depressions, and these depressions are referred to as lime sinks. They fill with rainwater and they produce ephemeral ponds to near permanent pond habitats for aquatic and wetland plants and any water dependent animals in the area. Dr. Sarin and Karen Moore surveyed the 7 largest lime sinks, and I further mapped and surveyed another 7.
Wow.
Let's see here. There are more lime sinks in here. There's some smaller ones around where it says Swamp Bay Sink, but I didn't give those names.
Okay.
Let's see here. The climate in southeastern North Carolina is humid temperate, with a yearly average of around 63, 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and a moderately hot 78 degrees summer average, and a very mild 50-degree winter average. The precipitation in the southeast is a little above the median for the southeastern United States at 52 inches a year, but occasional droughts, of course, do occur. 2 of the most recent droughts that are suspected to have caused the extirpation, which is the local extinction of several wetland plants, including Sarracenia purpurea, which is the purple pitcher plant. It hadn't been seen since the 2007-2008 drought. We looked and looked for it, and the rangers have been looking for it ever since, and still hasn't come back. By the time I started my survey in 2017, only one Sarracenia flava, the yellow pitcher plant, the picture in the upper left of the screen, remained within the park. The growing season is relatively long. We got 243 days. And here you can see the upper right is actually a picture of this past October. One of the marshes down the Sand Live Oak Trail, one of the newer sections of the park, and how dried just the grasses and sedges are in the marsh. Amazing. Since consistent records have been kept around the mid-1800s, 46 tropical storms and 34 hurricanes have come within 75 miles of the park. Of those, the strongest ones with pressure measurements and millibars whose eye have passed within 50 miles of the park have been Floyd, Fran, Florence, Bonnie, and of course Hazel. The 3rd strongest storm to hit the park occurred during my 2nd field season there and caused extensive flooding from rainfall and storm surges, and of course downed trees. It was amazing to see how long the flooding lasted, and you all, if any of you were there at that time, how much more rainfall we got the rest of the year. And it was that whole area was flooded for a long time, for many, many months through the winter even. Let's see here. Hurricane Florence actually broke the record for the single wettest weather event in the county at 23 inches.
Wow.
And that's almost half of the yearly average. So that was just dumped within that one weather event.
Wow.
It was amazing. That's we know. More intense storms coupled with sea level rise from climate change are producing higher storm surges that are depositing salt further inland. The sea level rise is already producing ghost forest along North Carolina. Many of you have seen this as you're traveling from Wilmington to Brunswick County. You can see a lot of the forests that are dead as you're going across the bridge there. And these ghost forest, let's see here. These also are the storm surge with the salt water is the likely cause of the standing dead forest also within Carolina Beach State Park. Here's a picture of one of them. The ghost forests are just inland from the brackish marshes that are exposed to the fluctuating tides of the estuary. And one section in the north on the park, that's on either side of the road leading to the marina. You can see a lot of dead pines there. And then if you go further south along the Sand Live Oak Trail, there are several inland of those brackish marshes. And you can see these images were taken during the summer. So you've got any deciduous trees would be green, but you can see the patches within these red where the trees have lost their needles or leaves. Sadly. Although saltwater intrusion is killing trees, much of the park's flora is adapted to salt spray. The mouth of the Cape Fear River is only 11 miles to the south, and the Atlantic Ocean is only 1.5 miles across to the east. This proximity produces natural community types. These are assemblages of plants, are abiotic and biotic factors. So everything together, the geology, the animals, the plants, the fungi, the bacteria, everything create a natural community type. And they all have distinct classifications and names. It is kind of difficult sometimes to see the intergrade between different natural community types. Just as a side note. The proximity to the ocean produces these natural community types and some subtypes that are usually relegated to within a few miles of the coast, such as the coastal fringe evergreen forest. The sandspit woodland subtype is only found at Carolina Beach so far, State Park. We also have the maritime coastal fringe evergreen forest. Of course, brackish marshes are going to be found only around the coast, and these other ones. And the oceanic salt spray also limits the diversity of plant species to those that are adapted to the chloride ion stress on their leaf tissues, the germinating seedlings, the higher salt levels within the soil, and also mechanical abrasion from windblown salt and sand. It's pretty rough living right against the ocean. Several species that are very abundant in the park and other nearby areas become fairly uncommon further inland. These include Ilex vomitoria, so our Yopon holly, Quercus virginiana, the live oak. Of course, these are all planted further inland, but they naturally occur closer to the coast. And black needle rush, so Juncus ramarianus, Acladium jamaicensis, so the sawgrass, and Spirabolus alterniflorus or Spartina, the saltmarsh cordgrass. So lightning and anthropogenic ignited fires are another natural disturbance that shape the natural communities within the park. Historically, these fires would have occurred every few years, and as such, some species have become dependent on these low intensity fires to remove the mid-level shrubs. Here you can see the shrubs on the left have been burned, but the taller trees remain relatively unharmed, compared to the other side, on the other side of the fire break, where you've got that dense shrub layer. And of course, anything that's growing beneath it is lacking sunlight. These frequent fires are necessary to maintain and improve the health of the fire-adapted natural communities, especially those wet pine savannas. Therefore, the flytrap trail, with its very diverse herb layer, including carnivorous plants with the flytrap, receives applied fire by the park staff more frequently than other places within the park. This unique combination of climate, geology, hydrology, disturbances has helped shape the longleaf pine ecosystem into one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the continent, with some areas having over 40 species per square meter. I think that stat comes from the green swamp. So you can go out there with a yardstick, cross it up, and you can find almost 40 species in that square meter in some places. Amazing. To demonstrate the resilience of Arista districta, the wiregrass that's endemic to North and South Carolina, I took a series of pictures following one of the prescribed burns at the park. So here is 1 day post burn. And you can see it's just a bunch of charred nubs. And then only 3 days later, you can see that it's the little green nubs are sprouting back. Let's see. Lost my spot here. Okay. And then you have 5 days later, you've got a fairly large green. And then you almost have a complete healthy savanna with the green in the background. And then several months later, let's say 3 months later, you've actually got the grass. This is the same clump all the way through the pictures, has reached reproductive maturity. It has fruits on it, it has seeds at this point. These natural resources did not go unnoticed by the European colonists. On this 1930s or 1737 map, you can see the symbolized abundance of trees throughout North Carolina and a little bit in the South Carolina there. This would form the foundation of the North Carolina economy under the British rule until the American Civil War. Tens of millions of acres of trees, mostly Pinus palustris and Pinus taeda, the longleaf and the loblolly pines, supplied the naval stores industry. By 1840, over 95% of American naval stores was attributed to North Carolina. And the Cape Fear region was the central hub of distribution prior to the Civil War, with 3 railroads termini at the Wilmington port. After decades of timber harvest and land conversion to agriculture, urban development, the longleaf pine ecosystem is now only reduced to less than 5% of its original range. Here's an image I took from the top of Sugarloaf looking down into the Cape Fear across over into Brunswick County. Sugarloaf Dune is a 50 foot, 55 foot tall sand dune that overlooks the Cape Fear River and Old Brunswick town on the opposing riverbank. Prior to European colonization, the land on both sides of the river would have been populated by a Siouan tribe of Native American hunter-gatherers known only as the Cape Fear Indians. We do not have the name that they would have called themselves. Discarded piles of river oyster shells are still visible within the park. You can go around and see the shell middens. The Cape Fear Indians were also known to consume a ritual emetic tea before these seasonal shellfish feasts, so they think that was part of their hunter and gathering. These leaves would have been from the caffeine-containing holly plant in the park, Ilex vomitoria, hence the name Ilex vomitoria. They would drink so much caffeine and make it so strong that they would purge. Since the increase in popularity of another caffeine-containing holly known as yerba mate from South America, there's been a resurgence in our local caffeine-containing leaves of our holly. So we have local Yopon tea. So here's a few that I found out there. European colonist attempts to colonize the area, or European attempts to colonize the area began with William Hilton, as we know from Hilton Head. This was in 1662. He wrote that he bought Campbell Island and the surrounding area from the tribal chief. Campbell Island would have been called Crane Island at the time, and it's a little bit south of the Wilmington port. So it's on the Cape Fear River. 2 years later, we have the Lord Proprietors, and we have Charlestown on Town Creek, and that would have been adjacent to Crane Island. And they had almost 800 people at Charlestown before they abandoned that one. The first permanent settlement in the area would have been Brunswick Town, founded in 1725, which was 60 years later. And according to local lore, Sugarloaf Dune was the last stand of the Cape Fear Indians, as no records of the tribe exist after a midnight attack by one of the Moore brothers of the Orton plantation. And this, like I said, is local lore. So, but after that, nobody knows where they went. There's speculation of different tribes that they may have joined. And during the American Civil War, Sugarloaf Dune provided a defensive position for several thousand Confederate troops encamped on its slopes. They would have been obviously unsuccessfully attempting to repel the Union Army in 1865. So it's one of the last stands, but it's amazing to me that thousands of troops were camped on Sugarloaf when you go there today in the park, and you can see beautiful trees. Following the Civil War, enterprising steamboat Captain John Harper named the town, or the beach opposite the town, Carolina Beach. So that's where the name came from. It was christened by Captain John Harper. And he had a railroad line installed from the Cape Fear River from his steamboat landing. So that would have been cutting down through the park, down Harper Avenue to the beach. This new beach, Carolina Beach, was popular, and tourists could quickly travel from Wilmington to the Carolina Beach in under an hour and a half. So this was very fast for the time, a steamboat to a little shoe fly train, and then you're at the beach from Wilmington. Today, we have over 6,000 residents of the town of Carolina Beach, and the park is one of 10 most visited of the state, 41 state parks and recreation areas in North Carolina. During World War II, this is a declassified 1942 War Department map. And here you can actually see in the upper left where the two previous railroad track lines ran through the park. Let's see here. And that was a mystery to me, because I knew about the one going the swamp trail that led across that, which is one of the park's main trails today. And also, but the other one, let's see. Yeah, they actually installed two different lines, and I think that bisected that creek that's running through there, and that is part of that, the swamp that is there now. The swamp had been called various different community types over the years as I dug through the documentation. And so that was kind of a fun mystery to uncover, because that creek is no longer active because it was cut up by the railroad tracks, the berms. During World War II, the population of Wilmington and Carolina Beach doubled. And the Carolina Beach was very popular with enlisted personnel and shipbuilders. Beyond the railroad tracks, the area around Sugarloaf Dune and the Scout Pond on this map is labeled as an Army recreation area. So I'm not sure what kind of disturbances went on there, maybe Jeep trails. And the park, since the park's establishment in 1969 as Masonboro State Park, the succession of superintendents and rangers and other staff have worked diligently to balance the park's mission of conservation, recreation, and education. There are two disturbances, the anthropogenic disturbances, that are a threat to sensitive and rare species and their habitat that are beyond the control of the state park system. When Snow's Cut was built in 1931, it was only 88 feet wide. Since then, when it was measured in 2015, it's quadrupled. It's now almost 400 feet wide. This is mostly due to the tides and also boat wakes. They couldn't have foreseen some of these more powerful boats that would be traveling in this intercoastal waterway area. And as some of you may know, the park on the opposite side of Carolina Beach State Park has already closed because the erosion has become so bad it's dangerous to be at that park, sadly. There's another area that the park needs, that hopefully the park can purchase maybe at some point, was the area near along the Old Dell Road border and the Lily Pond and Cypress Pond. It kind of bisects into the Cypress Pond. It's on private land, and it was clear cut during I think my second field season there. This may change the local hydrology of these rare ponds that are there, along with the rare animals and plants that live there. So hopefully something can eventually be done about that. A little brief taxonomy refresher for some of you. So I refer to a lot of things as, or a lot of groups as taxa. Many of the plants that I identified are trinomials. That means they are species, or they are subspecies or varieties. So for example, we've got our group of angiosperms, flowering plants, and then we have Fabaceae, a family, a pea family, and then the genus Amorpha, and then we have Amorpha herbacea, and then here's the variety, Amorpha herbacea. So I don't tend to say I found, X number of species. I say I found this many taxa, because that will include species, subspecies, and varieties. Just to clarify that. All right, we'll quickly go through my methods here. When I began this full park survey, I had a checklist of all the previous ones in the NRED checklist. So that would have been 390 taxa, and of course, Dr. Searon's lime sink flora. I set out with my GPS, a park map, a field press, which is this yellow press here, and my field notebook. This was the first day. I'm collecting a little Selaginella, so it's called Bryodesma. You can see me pressing it. My field work entailed hiking throughout the park during the growing season. So that would have been mostly February through November, since we have a long growing season. I was collecting representative plant specimens, observing species relative abundance within the park, locating the seasonally flooded depressions, so those lime sinks and other smaller ones, and also other notable features. I would scout on satellite imagery. That's how I found a lot of the other lime sinks. I was using satellite imagery, and I could see that there was something different going on. And then I would use my GPS and go out there and find it. I would also delineate the natural community types, record new populations of rare species, rare taxa. And I also had progress goals. So everybody's like, well, where did you start? How do you go about surveying an entire park? So I chopped it up into various sections that is based on natural community types. And then I would walk back and forth in a survey pattern looking at these. And I would also walk the 9 miles of trails multiple times a month. And I would scout areas that were high biodiversity. So that would have been the lime sinks and the flytrap trail. So that's the wet pine savanna. That was weekly to bi-weekly. Let's see. And I would also make sure that I canvassed each of these 5 survey sections at least once a month. Of course, and I had a list of species that I would know, or families that I knew were reproductive within different respective months. Like you have fall asters blooming and then early spring flowers. So I knew which ones those were. And I would be like, oh, this is the habitat. So I'd go look in these locations. I also began photo documenting. I think the second week I started taking photographs of all of the plants I was collecting and observing. And this is under the iNaturalist project, CBSP Flora. So if any of you want to go on there, if you're on iNaturalist, you can go to my project and you can look at all of the photos of the plants that I've collected. So maybe if you're in the park and you're like, hey, is this or this, that, you can go compare it to the ones that I've documented. I ended up photographing 63% of the full checklist. So I have lots and lots of pictures. There's 659 different observations in there. Let's see here. Let's see. So I waded into lime sinks, marshes, and swamps. I was looking for plants that were in flower or had mature fruits. That's the best way to positively identify a plant. Especially if it's unknown if it's a new plant. I would wade into the wet areas, especially if the water levels were low. And I, of course, took care not to step on any of the rare plants or the snakes or alligators or the cute little toads that were hopping around. The specimens I would select for collection contained reproductive material, except for 6 species that I didn't find reproductive. And the number of plants I would collect per taxon would vary depending on the abundance and, of course, the size of the mature plant. So here's an example of my methods for collecting. So in A, I have my field press out and I'm pressing some specimens. And then B, I'm back in the herbarium and I'm refining my specimens so it looks more clear. You can see more of the plant. And I'm moving the leaves and the location for pressing. And then in C, it goes into the herbarium dryer. So that's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit just to dry the plant out for a few days. And then D, I'm using the keys, the dichotomous keys, and a microscope to identify my plants. E, here's a an example of one of the carex, so one of the sedges I was identifying, and we're using the millimeter and micrometer scales sometimes under the microscope to identify these plants. And then when that's all done, the plants are pressed, are mounted, so they are glued, taped, or sewn onto acid-free paper, and then they'll have a data label that'll have all of the information on that, and then they'll have the number of the specimen for the herbarium in the upper, well, in one of the corners. So let's see. So identifying plants and also all of the data that I needed for them. I use the dichotomous key. So that's the weekly flora, the flora of the southeastern US. And here's an example of that. And then I would also consult the taxon descriptions. They have full descriptions and, well, of most plants in the flora of North America. And this is also available for free online. And then if I still had questions, I would consult taxonomic research papers or monographs, especially when I xeris, the yellow-eyed grass, are rather difficult, but beautiful. Then I would also look at their conservation status on NatureServe. And then I would look at their distribution within North Carolina on the Vascular Plant website of North Carolina. So here you can see Xeris jupicae, I think is how you say it. Richard's yellow-eyed grass has been found in 37 counties. And these are collections in herbaria if it's green. And then I would also compare my specimens to ones that were in the UNCW, the Syrian herbarium, or they were online via Cyrenaic. So I could actually look at them and compare them, which is nice. And Cyrenaic is also a free database for people to use. So here is my full collection in the herbarium cabinet. And all of my vascular plants will be stored and studied in herbaria as vouchers. These are represented by pressed stems, leaves, reproductive material, occasionally roots taken from about 1 to 4 individuals, of course, depending on rarity or abundance. And the written data that's including these, of course, has the name, the person who identified it, the person who collected it, and then a description of the plant, who it was growing or which plants it was growing with, its abundance level, and its location if somebody wanted to go back and find it again. And so this is an example of a data label that will be included. Let's see. To identify the natural community types within the park, I use the Natural Heritage Program classification of natural communities. I also included the global rarity status and the national vegetation classification codes. So if you find, once you have identified your natural community, you can go onto NatureServe just like the plants, and you can see if it is a critically imperiled, very rare, or if it's vulnerable, like our lily pond is considered globally vulnerable. So it is a very special place. Some plant taxa I observed, but I didn't collect. There were a few that I would visit, but I had never observed fruiting or flowering, such as this Apuntia. So this is a new one for the park, a new distribution record, Apuntia drummondii. It's near the marina, and also I think in the campground. Others were listed species, such as the sedge and the cypress pond. So I would only record their location and their abundance level. I also omitted all cultivated or horticultural plants growing around the ranger residences and offices because they didn't appear to be naturalizing within the park. And let's see. And of course, even a multi-season full park survey has limitations because some plants may remain dormant in the seed bank. Some seedlings may be consumed by herbivores. I found a lot of things that the tops had been munched off, so marsh rabbits or deer. And of course, there are inconspicuous cryptic taxa that might have been overlooked. Some of them might just be gone, extirpation, like the purple pitcher plant. And some species may have occurred in such low numbers that I missed them. And finally, my results. I spent 80 days in field over 2.5 years, and I collected 400 or observed 425 different taxa and produced 598 vouchers. These vouchers will be in the Siren, the UNCW herbarium, Chapel Hill, and the NC State herbaria once I put all the labels with them. The comprehensive checklist, so the full park checklist, is 611 infrageneric taxa. This includes 314 genera and 116 families. This is a 36% increase since I started the survey. 63 the taxa that I found are new records for the county. 141 are new records for the park. So that's, I think, a significant increase in new plants for the park. And 11, and some of those taxa were in 11 new families that were previously unknown to occur in the park. I also found 77 exotic species, and 13 of those were invasive. Here's an example of the finalized checklist. So if you go to the very end of my thesis, here's the checklist, and it's divided into lycophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. And the angiosperms are further subdivided into basal angiosperms, magnoliids, monocots, and eudicots. In this list, we've got, so each plant species or taxa or taxon, its last documentation. So this was if it was IVF, that would have been my survey. If it was NRID, so this way, anybody looking at this list would know at what point this plant was last seen, the species or taxon. Let's see here. This one indicates whether or not it's an exotic or an invasive exotic species. This column indicates its rarity status within North Carolina. These two columns are the global rarity status and state rarity status. And we have the endemic column, so the southeastern coastal plain or the Cape Fear Arch endemic. And lastly, this column indicates whether or not it was a new distribution record. So if it was a new Hanover County, it'd be NH, or if it was for the park, it was CB. And then I have asterisks on all of the families that were considered, that were newly found in the park. And then after I completed this checklist, I sent it to Dr. Weekly and his team at Chapel Hill, and they auto-generated a dichotomous key to the plants that I found. This is a great addition. So this will be very useful to any of y'all. It's going to be available for free. And so if you want a key to the plants, definitely I can send this to Charlie, or we can talk about it afterwards, how to just distribute this. And I also wanted to visualize the vascular plant biodiversity within the park. So when I say vascular plant, I mean everything that's not a moss liverwort or hornwort. So anything that has a taller plant that has vasculature. And so I broke it into a pie graph so we could better visualize the diversity within the park. Nearly half of the park's infrageneric taxa, which is about 47%, falls into 5 families. So there's a lot of grass, which is Poaceae, asters, Asteraceae, sedges, Cyperaceae, Fabaceae, which I learned, I did not know that the Southeast had a bean dip, is what they call it. And then we have Ericaceae, so we have all of our blueberry and heath type shrubs. That's the largest diversity within the park. And the most taxa-rich plant genera in the park also fall within almost these same families: the grasses, the asters, the peas, the sedges, and this is the madder or coffee family, Rubiaceae. And the most taxa-rich genera are actually Dicanthelium. There were 19. 16 Rhicospora. This is one of the more common ones you're going to see in the park if you're out walking around. This is Megalocarpa. It occurs in these dry pine areas. We also have the Quercus juvenata. So your small little, except for when you go down to the end of the sand live oak trail, you have that immense tall grove of sand live oak. And then we also had a type of 9 species. So the Eupatorium, this white aster, we had Andropogon, we have this lovely kind of rainbow, 3 different species of this rainbow grass. So it's kind of a chalky grass. It has blue, purple, and pink in it. It's very lovely. There's 2 that grow in wetlands and 1 that grows in dry areas. So I would recommend people look for these in their local native plant nursery and grow them. They're lovely. We also have lots of juncus. We had 9 different juncus, so the rushes, and 9 species of utricularia, so these little bladderworts. So distribution records. So there were 141 new amphigeneric taxa that I found that they previously did not know to occur in the park. One of the more lovely ones and a rare one that I found was Peltandra sagittifolia. So this lovely arum grows in one of the wetlands. These occur within 11 new families. I found 1 North Carolina listed species and 11 more taxa of concern. So these are all things they previously did not know to occur within the park. So this is helping save some more, hopefully protect more rare species, knowing that they occur here. And the most new species occurred within Asteraceae, Poaceae, which is the beans, and let's say asters, grasses, beans, sedges, and the carnation family. Let's see here. So compiling the rare plant list, we have 16 North Carolina listed species and 58 Natural Heritage Program designated species. So these are species that are not considered legally protected, but they are being tracked by our Natural Heritage Program because they are of conservation concern. Cyperus virens was one of the plants that I found there that was not on their list that needed to be included on the park list. 11 of those are new additions. 12% of the park's entire flora are considered rare or of conservation concern. And all of them, except for 6, have been documented within the past 30 years. That's great that the majority of the rare plants are still occurring in the park. And they have 79 taxa that are endemic to the southeastern coastal plain that occur within the park, and 2 that are just found within the Cape Fear geologic area. So everybody is familiar with the Venus flytrap. And then we have Liatris cochrae. And there were 2 more Cape Fear arch endemics, Aristida stricta, which is the wiregrass, and the Carpephrus. There it is, lovely there. Let's see here. Cirsium repandum. So this is one of the common thistles along the flytrap trail. Coreopsis falcata, that's also in the wet area. If you're looking at the pitcher plant overlook, it's I think it blooms in July, maybe August. And then we have the lovely creeping blueberry, the Vaccinium crassifolium. And these are all nearly endemic to the Cape Fear Arch region. So they are only found, what would that be, 80 to 100 miles around Wilmington in the entire world. I identified 19 natural community types, and 15 of the 19 are of conservation concern globally. So G1 is considered critically imperiled and G3 is vulnerable. So the majority of the park's area, the natural communities, are globally rare, unfortunately. Most of the park is dry longleaf pine or maritime upland forest. But there's those smaller, wetter communities, as you saw on the map that I had circled in blue, like the depressions, the ponds, the marshes, the swamps. And most of these wet communities, even they only cover like a small number of acres within the park. 81% of the listed taxa, which is about 13 taxa, occur within these wet areas. And let's see, all of the 9 major lime sinks, so the largest lime sinks, contain at least one listed species. So I feel like that's another critical reason to help protect the cypress pond from the clear cutting and changing its hydrology, because they all contain, I think that one contains the most listed plants. Initially going in, I thought it was going to be the grass pond, but it was end up being the cypress pond. And there are 15 different carnivorous plant species in the park. Of course, we have the world famous Venus flytrap. We have sticky sundews. We also have butterworts, this pretty blue purple butterwort. And then we have all these different bladderworts. These two, Utricularia radiata and Utricularia striata, occur in, I think, a couple of different ponds, lime sinks, and they were new to the park. So these are new records for the park. So that was a fun find. And then we had Sarracenia flavus, the yellow pitcher plant, and the purple pitcher plant. I retain it on the list in hopes that one day it will reemerge, but it will probably just have to be reintroduced at some point. During my survey, I found 36 new distribution records that were exotic taxa. So these are not native to this area, not native to North Carolina, that were found growing within the park. 3 of these are considered exotic species that were new. We had Lespedeza cuneata, Wisteria floribunda, and Vitex rotundifolia. Luckily, and all of 3 of these were found in disturbed sandy areas. The rangers have gotten rid of the Vitex, the beach Vitex, and the Wisteria, they're still working on its long snows cut on those eroded banks, so it's difficult to get to. The Lespedeza cuneata, I feel like maybe had been distributed in the park from mowers or possibly even leftover from building of some of the facilities. But that shouldn't be too difficult to get rid of. I also wanted to understand the categories of plants and how the proportions, let's see, how the categories were proportional within the park. So I wanted to see what overlapped with so this is a Euler diagram. So if you look at the orange circle, that's the exotics, and then the invasives, of course, are nested within it. But what was most important and interesting from this diagram is we have the records that were more than 20 years old, the records that were rare, and the records that were endemic. And then when I crossed them, we ended up with, overlapped them, we had 4 that were rare endemics that had not been seen in over 20 years. And that was Bermania, so it's a very small plant. One of the grasses, a little, let's see, button, let's see, what is that, button wort? And then one of the asters, Helenium. And I've got another picture of the Helenium pinnata fidum, the very cute little aster. Let's see here. So evaluation of my hypothesis, this is the number of exotics I found was a 47% increase in exotic plant taxa for the park. This far exceeded my expectation at finding more than previous surveys, but this is probably multifaceted, the causes. Beyond the warming climate, being conducive to the exotic species that have the wider phenological adjustment periods, there's also anthropogenic drivers that are bringing these plants in. So half of the exotic plants that I found in the park, 41, including 25 of the new park records, were found in consistently mowed areas or were trail side. And most of these mowed areas are, very high traffic. It's pedestrians, bicycles, dogs, motorized vehicles, boats, all of these things. And we're now up to over 1 million visitors annually at the park. I think that hit around the beginning of the pandemic. And these, when people travel through, seeds and other propagules can be on their bicycle tires or their car tires or even on their hiking boots. So it's very important to wipe your boots before you go hiking in a new area if you're traveling probably more than 30 miles. And even pets, of course, can release seeds from their fur. And I also feel like the park's lawnmowers may have been moved around. I'd have to ask the superintendent to see if sometimes the lawnmowers were borrowed from another facility that might have also dispersed some seeds from elsewhere. Even though these trails and some of the mowed areas, of course, may occasionally experience some prescribed fires that go through the park by the rangers. Some of them may be fire breaks, or they're so near the buildings or the grass is maintained from the to reduce erosion from foot traffic. So these locations are probably either really quickly reseeded with exotics, or they're acting as fire refuges within the park. North Carolina is the range terminus for several species. So the climate is just warm enough or just cold enough to have some plants come down from the north and also other plants coming up from the south. So some of our plants, like the beautiful Erythrina herbacea, the red coral bean here, grows abundantly in Florida, but North Carolina is its terminus. It doesn't grow any further north, and also Sabal minor here. So these would be considered climate tracking species. So they're growing in North Carolina because the climate is conducive. Are there more species that are moving northwards as it's becoming too hot further south? That's the next study. So 8 of the 36 species that are new for the park are also new distribution records for New Hanover County. These may be climate tracking species. The Lespedeza, of course, I mentioned, could be from construction vehicles, but other ones may have just been overlooked as they're very common along the roadsides. These are very small little plants. So, although 36% of the taxa on the checklist can added to the checklist can probably be attributed to the lengthy survey period, because I was able to revisit more sites more often throughout the seasons, raising the likelihood I was going to encounter more species. But other factors that may explain the rise in the new plant taxa are, of course, climate change, range expansions, shifts in dispersal patterns. There may be wetland birds that are visiting because their habitat has been destroyed elsewhere, and they're bringing in new plants when they visit. There's also hurricane dispersion, which is interesting to think of seeds being dispersed by hurricanes. And the requirement that lots of these plants, especially grasses and asters, you need a microscope to identify them below genus rank, so species and subspecies. And there's also a lot of ruderal and short statural belly plants. So a lot of those plants that were these teeny ones here that were exotics were very small in mowed areas and were probably often overlooked. So that could be why there was such a large increase in exotic plants. There we go. Although 36%, 36 exotic taxa were added to the checklist, 106 were new park distribution records that were native taxa. So these may be genuinely new range occurrences, or maybe they were just overlooked previously. One of the lovely ones here was one of the lupines, and this is along the Sand Live Oak Trail. While I personally observed 70% of the species on the checklist, I did not encounter 186 taxa that were on previous checklists. So I found about 36% more, but I didn't find 30%. So very close in the same numbers. A few reasons, some of these populations were low and overlooked, of course, or eaten. But each of the last 17 summers in North Carolina has brought record-breaking heat. And all 3 of my field seasons had above average monthly rainfall. This might have been giving preference to species that were preferential to wetter or warmer conditions, a cue to emerge from the seed bank. And of course, some underwent nomenclatural changes, so they have different names, and I couldn't take them off the list. Let's see here. Here's the beautiful little Helenium that hasn't been seen since 1939. In conclusion, we now have a giant checklist of 611 taxa and 141 are new to the park. So go out there and see if you can find them at 36% increased. Pretty happy with that. I hope the park ranger is happy too. But unfortunately, we found a 47% increase in exotic plants. That's 13% of the total. So hopefully they can find ways to eliminate, eradicate some of those exotic species that are trying to move in. And we have 74 taxa that are rare. That's 12% of their entire total. And 24% of the park's plants are endemic to either the southeastern coastal plain or the Cape Fear Arch nearby region. Let's see here. Of course, when we've covered all of these, let's see here. But we had the 30% missing, the 186. So hopefully they will pop back up. That's also another fun scavenger hunt to go try to find the taxa that I did not find. Products you may be interested in from this survey. Like I said, I'm producing the Common Plants Field Guides and also the Botanical Key that I mentioned from the weekly subset. And here's a lovely picture of the Quercus geminata, the sand live oak. It would be nice if somebody would actually run the genetics on this one to see if it's a cross between the live oak and the sand live oak, because they are such immense trees, and I just have not come across Quercus geminata that's that large anywhere else. And just for fun, I'll leave you with my my recommendations. I listen to audiobooks when I have free time, and botanical podcasts and YouTube videos. So these are always fun. If you haven't read or listened to any of these, this is The Invention of Nature about Humboldt. Genius of Place is about Frederick Law Olmsted. The Food Explorer is about our first USDA president or chair. I can't remember what the title is. That was Fairchild. And Founding Gardeners is very fun. So that is some of our founding fathers, but founding gardeners. It does include a lot on Thomas Jefferson. And if you haven't been to Monticello, there's a beautiful garden there, and they've retained a lot of his plants. Cool, and that's all I have, and I'll open up for questions if my voice holds up. Thanks, Charlie.
Folks, if you want to ask a question, a lot of times we do it by chat, but I think it's more fun if we do it vocal. So unmute yourself and ask Amanda a question, if you will, and let's see where it goes.
Hi, it's Karen. I just wanted to say I love The Invention of Nature too. That was a really fun book. Oh, and I did have a question. I bought some Vaccinium cressida, 3 little plants from somebody. So you're saying that they're endemic to our region? Because I actually got them from a nursery that's in the direction of the Piedmont.
Vaccinium crucifolium, the little creeping blueberry.
Yep.
Yeah, it's endemic to our area. Well, since that's great that there is a nursery selling it. I think more people should. It's a great little ground cover. I mean, I've seen things that are, people sell fly traps all over the world, and they're endemic just to the Wilmington area. So yeah, that's great.
Amanda, can you talk a little bit more about the biodiversity hotspot that this is part of?
Yeah, a little bit. So if you, as in what a biodiversity hotspot is, or just more
Yeah,
about
and
the-
what factors might have created a situation here in southeastern North Carolina that is so hot?
yeah, so we've got the Cape Fear Arch region, and that one's definitely a little hotspot within a hotspot. So the biodiversity hotspot is a region that has levels of high endemism. So when you're talking about, you look at the area that's creating, or not creating, but new plants are evolving and influencing the area. So you've got your climate, you've got your soils, you've got your fire regimes. So all of your different disturbances, out the salt spray that I talked about, all of those different factors are coming in, and a lot of them factors make it difficult for plants to grow. So if you think about, for example, the Venus flytrap, it's in that kind of wet, mucky, acidic soil. So it had to evolve to really not have much of a root system, and it's getting its nutrients as nitrogen from plants. And then it has to deal with the fire, but the fire comes through and knocks out the shrubs. So you've got this plant that has evolved just to grow in that particular place. But so that makes it a high level of endemism. Oh, someone's saying hi through the window. And then once you have all these lovely endemics that have evolved in that particular place under those particular conditions, if there's a high density of them, it's considered a hotspot. But these hotspots are also places that are at risk for extinction. So development from roads coming through, from cities, from housing developments. And there are globally 36 around the world that are high density special plants endemics to that particular area that are about to be plowed under, from whether it's burning in the rainforest or mining locations. And ours, the Atlantic Gulf Coastal Plain, goes from, I think, around New Jersey all the way down through Texas. So that's that larger Gulf Plain. And we have the, like I said, 30% endemism rate. So 30% of the species are only found, have evolved under those conditions to grow in that particular area. And then we have our Cape Fear Arch region, that small geologic region. That's really where the flytrap is, and those other species evolved in that particular place. And I talked about prior in here with the rising and lowering of our we had our ice ages. So we had the flooding, so the oceans would come in and they kind of create a little island. So that Cape Fear Arch region is uplifted, so it's a little bit higher. And so a lot of the plants would have come in from surrounding areas, and that was its little refuge up on that island. And of course they had to adapt to whatever conditions were on that island, and they might have evolved into a different species. And that's how we have these very unique plants just to that area, because they had just to adapt to that particular environment at that time. And they've managed to hang on, and they haven't gone extinct, but now they're under threat. And so it's really good for us to look at these places and help conserve them, especially because it's a high density of very unique individuals. So that's a large, you're really helping save a good section of the gene pool, the diversity on Earth. But of course, we need to spread it out and still maintain room so that things can continue to go out. Did I cover it well enough, Dr.?
That's fine. That's fine. Absolutely, Amanda.
It's there's some lovely maps out there, some lovely like heat topography maps you can look on. I think it was a Nature Conservancy had a lovely one of the United States for a long time, and you can see the Wilmington kind of hot spot. I think like it was Alabama, and then of course in California too, and southeastern Florida.
Did you find Sabal palmetto there?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, but Alicia and I thought we did, but it's just down there near Oak Island. That's the last little spot. That would be great if somehow it could get, it does say in the weekly flora that it was all the way to the Outer Banks, up the Outer Banks, but people ate them, cabbage palm. So they ate the apical meristem, the top off the plant, and that of course kills it. It's a maybe people, continuing to plant it, and maybe it'll cross with some of the natives and they can kind of bring it back. That would be nice. I'm not sure. That would have been a cool find. I really thought that we'd find more state records because of the port and the large container ships that pass through. I went through the marshes. There is a new salt marsh there that has, so that was a fun new find. So that was a new natural community type there where they removed the Phragmites on the way to the marina, kind of that low-lying area on Snow's Cut. But yeah, I really thought with those giant container ships passing through, we'd get more oddballs that would just pop off.
Yeah, that would be something you would expect. I'm surprised you didn't.
Mhm.
There may not be enough high ground, not necessarily that they're aquatic, but there may be some high ground species. Moreover, it'd be interesting to see what the actual port itself has on its high ground, whether there's some exotics there.
Yeah, there were a few new, like kind of brackish marsh species that I found that hadn't occurred there before, that they hadn't found before. It was one of the Chenopodium or something. But there were a few, but they weren't completely unexpected. But I also noticed a lot of erosion. So with that sea level rise, were large just chunks, falling off that had the Spartina and other, marsh grasses in it. So, if any of those might have come up, they probably just sloughed back off into the tide. So, and with the hurricanes, the sea line, definitely the beach line changed after Hurricane Florence, because I went out there the week before it hit and did a lot of collecting along that shoreline, and then came back and was like, oh, this is completely different. Yeah.
Amanda, this is Charlie. Is there any plans for trying to preserve the shoreline along Snow's Cut to keep it from eating into the park? Is the
Army Corps of Engineers that paper that I found was from 2015. So they're quite aware of the situation, just how much money they're going to have to put and how much manpower to try to stop that. I'm not sure. I think Chris Helms would probably know the most about that, the superintendent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of erosion, and you can see the trees falling off the hillside. Every single storm we get, there's several more that fall down. And since the park on the other side is already closed, more people who were fishing on that side are coming to the Carolina Beach side, park side, and going down the embankments. And they've made little makeshift ladders, and it's difficult for the rangers to patrol that area. Like, you're not supposed to climb down a 15-foot eroding cliff.
Yeah.
But you do.
Is Snow's Cut brackish?
Yes, so it connects. So that area, Pleasure Island, was connected to the mainland until the Army Corps bulldozed through it to make a connector so we have our Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway, so you can take your boat all the way up the Atlantic seaboard. And they made that little cut through from the waterway over to the Cape Fear, so you didn't have to go all the way around to the mouth of the Cape Fear, and you've got the Frying Pan Shoals and the graveyard of the Atlantic, so you can actually cut through that more safely and get up to the Wilmington port faster. So yeah, that influx of salt water has really changed. Like I said, there's a new salt marsh there that wasn't there before, which is kind of fun to find new plants, but it's definitely with all that salt water coming through, and then you have the tides coming up the Cape Fear River, and then you had those railroad tracks cutting up that little creek through there. it just kind of messed with all of that in there. And that's why I said that one swamp, everybody was like, no, it's this, no, it's that. And it really was because all these things that happened to it. It was just kind of a mess. But there's some new community types coming back where they're getting rid of the Phragmites. So in the next 20 years, it's going to be all sorts of new things to find. So, but
Amanda,
so.
Amanda, you mentioned you got 77 exotics and 13 invasives. How did you differentiate between exotics, pure simple, and invasives?
Yeah, that is a good question. So exotic is a non-native species to the area. Or yes, exotic is non-native, but then our invasives, there is so the USDA has designated some plants as noxious weeds. But we didn't, I think I only had one of those in the park. Then North Carolina also has its noxious weed list. And then we have, what are they called? The Invasive Plant Council, I think is what they're called. So you can go online and find the Invasive Plant Council of North Carolina, and they have broken down invasive plants in the different regions of North Carolina. So invasive plants are plants that are non-native. They're exotic species that are coming into a habitat and taking over the area and like basically crowding out anything else that lives there. So when you see those Phragmites around that common reed, all along the marshes, that's the only thing there. It's a big monoculture. It's just like, oh, nope, nobody else can grow here. And it's just destroys the ecosystem because none of the animals can live there that depended on all the other plants that were there. So they are working hard to get rid of them. They've gotten rid of most of the invasives. They got rid of, there was a Amelia, was that Chinaberry? There's also the Polowania, in there. There were quite like I said, 13 invasives. That's how I decided to categorize invasives. I did contact the Chapel Hill, what's his name? I can't remember that professor's name now to determine, because he's like, well, how do you determine what's invasive in this particular area? Because what may be invasive in the southeastern coastal plain of North Carolina may not be invasive in the mountains. You've got a completely different habitat. So I had to go by region.
That's why I asked the question.
Oh yeah, definitely. Hopefully
somebody asked when the plant guide would be available.
As soon as I finish it.
Okay.
I've got the key. I can definitely send y'all the dichotomous key and you can use that. That's just, black and white print. So until then, I would recommend going on to my iNaturalist, to my ESP Flora. And that way, let me see if I can scroll back to that screen. And that way you can look at all of my plants. They also have, Chris Helms has made a park. Oh gosh, he has his own, I guess I'll send it to you too, so you can send it out to everyone. His own little project for the park. So a lot of places that you go to, if you're on iNaturalist and you join that particular group for that particular area, whether it's a botanical garden, an arboretum, a park, anything you observe on iNaturalist automatically will be populated into their project. So it does help any location that you go to know what's there. I do that with the local arboretum here. So, and it also, everything that I found is also on Chris Helms Park. Let's see. It's also populated onto his too. There it is.
Okay.
So yeah, just go into iNaturalist. You can do this on your phone.
Yeah.
It's on both. And then you can go to this flora right here, and that's the image that you'll see when you search for my particular project.
Okay. Very good.
Cool. But yeah, I'll get that out as soon as possible. I'll send it to y'all, and hopefully maybe we can talk to the Friends of Carolina Beach State Park and see if they'll help do some printing for the guides I'm not sure how much money the state park will be willing to put into printing a bunch of guides. I'm sure they'll do some, but hopefully
Yeah.
we can find some donations to print the guides. Because I
Well,
like,
if they put it online, everybody can print it out on their own. So
yeah.
that's really the best way, I think.
Yes, and that is one of the good things about being at the coast is that with the flat land, you have cell phone service throughout. But if you come up here to the mountains and you haven't downloaded it onto your phone, you're just looking at the website, you may go down into the valley and you do not have service and you won't be able to find it.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things, just remember when you're traveling to different locations, like hiking out in the woods, not everywhere has cell phone service.
Amanda,
Go ahead.
okay, I was going to ask a quick question. Were you surprised at the number of bladderwort species that you found, or taxa, the 9?
Yeah, I was surprised that there were 2 new ones that I found. So, but they're a little particular to key out. You have to like look at the back side of the flower, like, and counting roots. Yeah, so yeah, when you get down to it, they're a little bit nitpicky. So maybe it shouldn't have been too surprising, but yeah, it was a little bit. I was like, oh, well, this is great. There's more. I mean, carnivorous plants everybody loves them. So yeah, it's fun to find new carnivorous plants in the park.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to know of the 15 taxa.
Do you want to come say hi? Come say hi.
Who is it?
We're talking about plants.
Amanda, somebody was asking about the Cape Fear Arch. You might mention that, but there is an organization, actually, the Cape Fear Arch, that is concerned about flora and fauna there. So if you want to answer that question, just please talk about Cape Fear Arch. But the answer is also go check out the organization. Are they called the Cape Fear Arch? I think they are.
Yeah, it's Cape Fear Arch something. Do you
Yeah.
remember, Paul?
No, I don't. I remember had a meeting once over on Bald Head Island. years
Yeah,
ago.
I've gone to their meetings. I'm sure if you go online with Google and do Cape Fear Arch, you'll
Mhm.
find the organization itself.
And John
Probably.
Taggart's on the board, so you can definitely
Hey.
ask him about it.
It may
Yeah.
be more geographic than it is, in terms of what they're looking at, so to speak. They're looking at this area, but it's, maybe people are not looking necessarily at the arch kind of features, but just this southeastern North Carolina.
Mhm.
Amanda, how do you tell a shell midden from a big party at Carolina Beach?
I think of a shell midden as just a giant pile of oyster shells that looks like it's been there for a while. Well, you'll have the osprey that'll come through and other animals that'll eat some of the oysters, but it's not going to be a pile of like 100 shells piled up. They may eat one, but I don't know. There may be a mammologist or an ornithologist out there that's seen an osprey eat in the same spot. Maybe, I'm not sure, but that's how I consider what a shell midden is. Is that the
I just know they had big parties out there at Carolina Beach in the past. They
yeah,
probably had oyster roasts.
yeah, you're right.
One,
Now the person that I found that from was the state archaeologist. So it was
okay.
an interview with a state archaeologist talking about the shell middens in the area, and then
Okay.
we're at the park too. So yeah, we probably have to ask him, like, is this one that and that one's this? So, but I found probably 3 or 4 of them while I was out there.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it could have been somebody from the 1920s had a giant party right there. You're right. So, but yeah, or the Native Americans as the state archaeologists.
That's right. One last point. 50 plus years ago, I gave a seminar at University of Maryland, and a lady who was on the faculty there stood up at the end of my talk and said, after a series of questions and things, just like we're doing now, she said, do you know that you misspelled the name of a species? And
Which
you,
one is it?
and I think it was the same plant. You've misspelled Juncus romarianus.
Did I?
Mark it down in the next presentation you make, spell romarianus correctly.
Ah, well,
I think it was the same species. That was over 50 years ago. So then
well, if that's all I did wrong, then I'm.
that's all I can see you did wrong, man. You've done a yeoman's job at this. This is a fantastic database of information, and you've really done an excellent job of putting it together and taking it apart and putting it back together again. I really applaud you for your work.
I second that. That's why I wanted to have the members hear this too. And fortunately, got it recorded so we can distribute it even a little bit more. So it is something else. And I'm really looking forward to her, Amanda, you coming here and leading a walk. I hope we can work that into your schedule.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I hope you'll do that too, Amanda. That would be really fun. I need guides when I'm out there. But I love black needle rush. I think it's wonderful. And I wrote that down when you mentioned it, and I didn't catch that. Misspelling either.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. Yeah, because sometimes there are slight changes. But yeah, I'll have to go
I
check
think
that
it's
out.
A instead of
Yeah.
E, right? And,
Oh,
yeah.
looks like somebody's getting crazy. Sorry, y'all.
Well, if there isn't anything else, we'll wrap this up, and we really thank you and kudos to you, Amanda, for this job well done, I think. So I will go ahead and end the meeting then, and
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody learned something.
Oh, yeah.
Cool, and I will see y'all soon. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. I hear it. I hear her. Where is she?
He is so cute. Bye. Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.